The Institute of Directors of Nigeria hosted its 2019 Fellow Luncheon in Lagos. It focused on the theme Stimulating Economic Growth Through Reform and Privatization. Guest speaker at the event and Director General of Bureau of Public Enterprises (BPE), Mr. Alex Okoh, used the occasion to give updates on the sale of state enterprises since 1999.
Let me briefly, just share with us how the structure of the economic reform and privatization, of the federal government, runs. So in Nigeria, privatization has been an operational policy of government through deregulation of sectors and industries. And interestingly, this is not something that, was ushered in during the democratic dispensation. The the predecessor of the of BP was actually the Technical Committee on Privatization and Commercialization, and this was established 30 years ago, I believe, during the regime of President Ibrahim Babangida. Yeah, so it's not really, a recent policy. Now, the National Council on Privatization, of course, is responsible for formulating and approving policies on privatization and commercialization. And the Bureau of Public Enterprises, which was created through the Public Enterprises Act of 1999, implements the sector reforms. So the NCP is the governing body, while the BP is the implementing agency. And from inception till date, BP has successfully reformed by way of privatization, commercialization, and in some cases, concession, a total of 154 public enterprises, or what you refer to as state-owned institutions. So what's the privatization scorecard like? Like I said, a total number of 154 state-owned enterprises have been privatized, concessioned, or commercialized so far. And they cut across the various sectors of the economy. So you see the motor vehicle assembly plants here, the Steyr, the Volkswagen, banking and finance, cement, energy, construction and services, hotel and tourism, of course, which includes Transcorp, mines and steel, with the exception of Ajaokuta, which is still a problem, oil and gas, and power, most recently the power sector, where we privatized 11, discos, about 6 or 7 generation companies. So that's really the sectoral analysis of the privatization and commercialization activities of the federal government in the past 30 years. Now, and these are the various strategies with which we have implemented the program. Some have been by asset sale, direct asset sale, a huge portion of them by concessioning. So assets like the hydro dams, hydropower dams were concessioned, not privatized. The port terminals, 25 port terminals, were also concessioned, not privatized. And core investor sale, private. So these are essentially the various transaction strategies and modalities which privatization and commercialization has been executed so far. Now, in terms of performance, we're talking about the scorecard. We reckon that 67% of the 154 state-owned enterprises that have been privatized have been largely successful. So that negates the narrative, out there that privatization doesn't work, or that privatization is not, a veritable tool to drive economic growth and development. That hasn't been our experience so far. Now, we have also some, significant portion non-performing, about 27%, will be honest and candid enough to admit that. But we can also determine what the fundamental reasons for the non-performance of these enterprises are. Some of them have been policy-related, especially the motor vehicle assembly plants, policy-related. The textile industry also have been policy, related, the non-performance. But we haven't just stopped, at this picture. We have instituted a process through which, we want to be able to bring in all the stakeholders, including the government agencies responsible for setting the appropriate policies for these enterprises to thrive, to begin to look at how we can reverse, the narrative around this particular group of companies that are not performing. So in essence, about 67% of the enterprises, state-owned enterprises that have been privatized are doing very well. If you look at this telecoms sector, for example, which was a strong focus of the Bureau of Public Enterprises between 1999 and 2003, I mean, it's led to a huge, huge transformation of that entire sector. If we compare what we have now in terms of this quality of the service, even the pricing of the service, and the ease of communication compared to what it was in the days of Nitel, I mean, no one needs any long sermon in terms of the use and the benefit of privatization. The pension industry also, because sometimes we tend to focus only on the sale of assets. A significant part of our activities also have to do with institutional reforms. So we actually reformed the pensions industry. PENCOM is a creation of the Bureau of Public Enterprises. So, and we can see how that industry has also transformed significantly in the past, 10, 12 years. I mean, the pension reform has not been longer than 12 years. And already you are talking about, a total asset base that is competing with the entire capital market. That is a significant outcome in terms of the benefit of the reform of the pension sector. The seaports also, it's one area of liberalization that is also often overlooked. And the scorecard is quite impressive, in terms of, the services from a lot of the terminals in the seaports. So these are some of the selected cases of how well the privatization process has helped in terms of economic growth. LMA Petrochemical and Fertilizer Company is an exceptional, case for us. Now, LMA was privatized in 2006 and, barely operating at about 22% capacity when it was privatized. Now the company is the largest single-train fertilizer plant in the entire universe, producing about 1.5 trillion tons annual capacity, LMA petrochemical industry. I'll also give us an interesting statistic. LMA was sold for about $200 million. Currently, no, not currently, in terms of the aggregate dividends that have been paid to the federal government for ownership of just 5% of this plant, we have gotten close to $30 million in 8 years. $30 million for a plant that was sold for $200 million, right? And even at the point of sale, government was still subsidizing the operations of the plant. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer that really government has no business in business, apart from just providing the enabling environment for business to thrive. That is the business of government in business, to provide the enabling environment for businesses to thrive under the leadership of the private sector. So that's just, an interesting case of privatization. Another brilliant case of privatization by way of concessioning is the seaports. And we can see the statistics in terms of, the investments, the revenues that have been generated over the past, the ports were privatized, I think, in 2005, started the privatization. But over that period, very, very significant, results in terms of the performance of the seaports compared with when it was purely managed by the Nigerian Ports Authority. To conclude, I think that in order for this economy to attain, the critical momentum that is necessary to, accelerate economic growth, greater private sector participation through privatization is essential.
Mr. Okoh speaks further on the state of liberalization of public enterprises in Nigeria and the nexus with the capital market.
In terms of the impact and the benefits of privatization for the economy, we see that for the transactions that we've already concluded, including the 154 that I mentioned, about 1.2 million jobs have been created as a result of this privatization. Over and above the number of employees that were previously engaged in those enterprises pre-privatization, right? So in terms of job creation, privatization has created significant value. In terms of also saving the government the subvention that was previously directed at sustaining these enterprises because they were not running on a profitable or viable basis prior to privatization, we see a significant savings for the federal government in terms of the subventions that are now redirected to to the provision of other social services, and also in terms of encouraging the private sector, private investors, to be the leaders of the economic growth. Like I said, government really has no business in business beyond providing the enabling environment for businesses to thrive. So we've been able to motivate and incentivize the private sector to play their rightful role as the drivers of growth in the economy. So for us, privatization is a veritable strategy for driving economic growth. And please recall once again that the initial wave of privatization was done through the capital market. First Bank was privatized through the listing. UBA, Unipetrol, most of the oil servicing companies were privatized through the capital market. However, it's important that we also admit that the capital market is experiencing some of the challenges right now. So it's important that we list in a way that does not diminish the value of the investors. We'll just be penalizing them unduly by asking them to list at a point when the capital market cannot compensate them for value. So we're looking at some of the fundamentals in terms of the liquidity of the market itself. So the discussions are ongoing, and we've already identified some of the key enterprises that we can bring to the market as soon as the market conditions become more favorable.
With over 2 trillion naira realized from the sale of 154 SOEs since 1999, BPE has made a 67% success rate in terms of the performance of the privatized public enterprises. Nigerians are, however, interested in the efficiency of the distribution segment of the power sector, which was privatized since 2013 and will have multiplier effects on the economy.